TRADCAST Express. TRADCAST Express, it's Saturday, June 7th, 2025. It's been almost exactly a month now since the election of Robert Francis Prevost as Leo XIV. A quick review of his first 30 days confirms our initial suspicions. Leo is fully on board with the Second Vatican Council and the post-conciliar program, including the magisterium of Jorge Bergoglio, Francis. He may not be as in-your-face about it, or as theologically radical as Bergoglio, and maybe he places the emphasis a little differently here and there, but by and large, it's the same thing. And of course, that's not really surprising, considering Prevost loyally submitted when Bergoglio was in charge, so obviously he accepts his magisterium. And that's of course how it's supposed to be in the Catholic Church. The Pope teaches, and the rest of the Church accepts that teaching with childlike trust and submission. That may be news to people like Peter Kwasniewski or Kennedy Hall, but it's the truth nonetheless. Now, unlike Francis, Leo XIV actually seems to be the proverbial nice guy. He has manners, he appears balanced and reserved, he thinks before he speaks, and he knows that sometimes it's okay to say nothing at all. He clearly has a taste for beauty and is not at war with traditional customs. In short, Leo appears to be like Francis doctrinally, but with Latin, lace, and incense. And that's a problem. You see, Bergoglio's hatred of Catholicism was palpable, but Leo rejects the true faith with kindness, beauty, and reverence. So which of the two do you think is more dangerous? Now, regarding the traditional Latin Mass, I suspect that Leo will be more lenient than Francis. He may modify or even revoke Traditionis Custodes, Francis' 2021 decree phasing out the traditional Latin Mass. But just as it was with John Paul II and Benedict XVI, it would be to keep the trads happy and playing along with the Vatican II Church. Because if you can convince them that they can have whatever traditional liturgy they want, as long as they don't make too much of a fuss about Vatican II and the new Mass, chances are most of them will probably happily take that deal, especially at this point, after the Bergoglian tyranny of Traditionis Custodes. Just ask the Latin Mass adherents in the Diocese of Charlotte, North Carolina. It's been utter turmoil there the last few weeks, and you've probably even heard about it already. There's been a new Novus Ordo bishop in charge there since last year, the least Reverend Michael Martin, who's been a Novus Ordo bishop for barely just a year. He's a conventual Franciscan, just like John Stowe of Lexington, Kentucky. Now, this Bishop Martin is a radical anti-Catholic Vatican II modernist. He hates Catholicism with every ounce of his being. That much is clear from the draconian measures he's wanted to impose on the people in his diocese who want to assist at the traditional Latin Mass, and even pious practices he wants to forbid for the Novus Ordo Mass. To summarize, in keeping with Traditionis Custodes, Martin wants to ghettoize the traditionalists in his diocese. Yeah, that's the Church of Inclusion for you. And so he's basically making it as difficult as possible for them to go to the traditional Mass in the diocese. According to a letter of May 23rd, 2025, all diocesan Latin Masses are going to be removed from parishes and will be consolidated into one single location, a chapel kind of out in the boonies, which is specifically being established for traditionalists only, with 2 Masses for each Sunday and Holy Day. That's one single chapel for the entire diocese, which is pretty large geographically. The effective date for that was going to be July 8th, but that has since been postponed by 3 months to October 2nd. Now, a few days after the release of that announcement, on May 26th, a 4-page memo from the bishop to his priests was leaked that basically coached them on how to counter objections to the proposed crackdown on the traditional Mass. We'll get back to that in a moment. Then, on May 28th, the draft of a pastoral letter was leaked which outlined at length what was and was not going to be permitted liturgically in the Diocese of Charlotte long term. And that draft contained absolutely crazy stuff, like forbidding Latin to be used at any part of the Novus Ordo Mass, forbidding kneeling for the reception of Holy Communion, forbidding priests from praying private vesting prayers before Mass, and so on. I mean, ridiculous, draconian stuff. The link to it is available for you in the show notes for this episode. Now, according to subsequent comments by the diocese, that letter was only an initial draft that underwent considerable change afterwards. But of course, that could just be damage control. Either way, the draft shows the anti-Catholic spirit that's animating Michael Martin. All right, going back to that leaked memo now with responses to objections. Under the question, what can people do who find the traditional Latin Mass to be a blessing, Bishop Martin writes the following in point number 4. Quote, "Renew your faith commitment to the Roman Catholic Church. One of the reasons that Traditionis Custodes was promulgated was to stem a growing tide of traditional Latin Mass adherents who were denying the validity and the legitimacy of the liturgical reform dictated by Vatican Council II and the magisterium of the Supreme Pontiffs. Many who participate in the traditional Latin Mass in the Diocese of Charlotte are in complete communion with Vatican II, the magisterium of the Church, and her Supreme Pontiffs, and do not deny the legitimacy of the liturgical reform. However, there are those who deny these truths. This is evidenced most frequently in social media posts, blogs, and letters written that definitively declare such." Unquote. Now, there's no denying that that is true. There are people, I don't know how many of them in North Carolina, obviously, but among the diocesan indult traditional Mass-goers, there are people who don't just go to the traditional Mass for reasons of beauty or nostalgia or reverence, but for doctrinal reasons, because they rightly detest Vatican II and the new Mass and the post-conciliar revolution. We're talking about people who agree with The Remnant, for example, and Catholic Family News, and Peter Kwasniewski, and Kennedy Hall, and such like. Now, before going any further, let me be clear what I am and am not saying. Of course, I sympathize with all the people who are sincerely trying to be good and pious Roman Catholics, the way everyone was Catholic up until the death of Pope Pius XII in 1958, and who in good faith believe that they must do this in communion with the Novus Ordo hierarchy. Yes, I totally sympathize with the struggle, with the confusion and the difficulties involved, especially as regards raising children who will love the faith and the Mass and seek to live a morally upright life. These people are no doubt experiencing great personal suffering, and in no wise do I mean to make light of that or poo-poo their sincere efforts, subjectively considered. And of course, Bishop Martin is a disgusting anti-Catholic modernist. However, let's just look at this for the moment from a different perspective, from the perspective that these diocesan Mass traditionalists themselves would agree with, namely, the idea that Michael Martin is the legitimate Bishop of Charlotte and the Novus Ordo Magisterium is the Catholic Magisterium, and the Novus Ordo popes are true popes. Then the question is, if Bishop Martin decides to restrict the traditional Latin Mass severely, why is that such a big deal? Then people can simply go to their local parish and attend the Novus Ordo Mass instead. Because then the Novus Ordo is Catholic and pleasing to God. because then it did come from the Catholic Church and from the Supreme Pontiff, who cannot give an evil rite of Mass to the Church. Then, sure, you may still have your personal liturgical preferences and attachments and stuff, but these would obviously have to yield to the local bishop's judgment. He is then the shepherd guiding the souls of that diocese. And people who are more interested in attending a specific rite of Mass than in being in communion with their diocesan bishop have obviously not understood Catholicism. Again, this is granting for the sake of argument that Martin is the lawful bishop of the diocese and Leo XIV, the Pope. If, on the other hand, the diocesan traditional Mass-goers hold that they will only attend the traditional Latin Mass because the Novus Ordo is not Catholic, is displeasing to God, is perhaps invalid even, and so on, why then they shouldn't be in communion with Bishop Martin anyway. And then they have no place at the diocesan traditional Mass at all. Because the only stipulation under which the diocesan traditional Latin Mass is possible is if it is celebrated in communion with the Vatican II religion and its hierarchy, and not in disobedience to it. So, in terms of principle, Bishop Martin's position makes sense. And that was also the reasoning underlying Francis' Traditionis Custodes. If the people who go to the Latin Mass do, in fact, as is often claimed, accept Vatican II and the liturgical changes and just have a personal preference for the pre-Vatican II liturgy, then they can prove their loyalty to the Novus Ordo Church by subordinating their personal preferences to the directives of the Holy See and the local bishop. And they'd even gain merit in the process. If, on the other hand, it's not simply a matter of personal preference for them, but a matter of doctrine, then they're not being loyal and submissive to the Novus Ordo hierarchy, and so why should that hierarchy allow them to have the traditional Mass then? See, all of this drama exists only because people are trying to reconcile two things that simply do not go together: the pre-Vatican II Roman Catholic faith and the modernist hierarchy of the Vatican II Church. You cannot be a true Roman Catholic under the Novus Ordo hierarchy. It doesn't work. These two will forever be in conflict one way or another. By the way, who appointed Martin bishop again? That was Pope Francis. But he didn't do it alone. There was another man involved in the selection process, and that is the head of the dicastery for bishops. And that man was then Cardinal Robert Francis Prevost, today known as Pope Leo XIV. And it gets better. On April 1st of this year, then Cardinal Prevost had a meeting in Rome with none other than Bishop Michael Martin. According to a report by The Pillar, linked in the show notes, Prevost advised Martin to slow down with big changes he was trying to make in his diocese, especially relocating the diocesan cathedral. Now, that was before the draconian restrictions on the traditional Mass had been announced publicly. In any case, a lot of trads in the Vatican II Church are hopeful that now that he's Leo XIV, Prevost will intervene in the Diocese of Charlotte and stop Martin from cracking down so hard on the traditional Latin Mass. As our friends at the WM Review note in their article on Charlotte's destroyer bishop, quote, "Nothing would better establish Prevost's credentials as the hero, the role that too many traditionalists and conservatives have decided he must be filling, than striking down the pantomime villain of Bishop Michael T. Martin," unquote. Yes, indeed, and that gives rise to speculation. Could it be that this whole thing is mostly theater? Is Martin perhaps being so ridiculously anti-traditional to the point of absurdity precisely so that Leo XIV can step in and save the day? And that might just be what it takes for the trads in the Vatican II Church to be so enamored with Leo XIV that they will agree to just be content with their liturgical niche and be quiet about the new religion of Vatican II. I'm not saying that it is so, but I wouldn't rule it out either. Remember that Martin didn't crack down on the traditional Latin Mass so severely until after Leo was elected. Now, we'll end today's episode with an interesting soundbite on this controversy, two actually, from Michael Matt, editor-in-chief of the Recognize and Resist publication, The Remnant. In a video released June 1st, 2025, entitled Charlotte Showdown, Why Does Bishop Martin Hate Latin Mass Catholics? Matt says this.
Make profits out of all the traditional Catholic pioneers who predicted, now with incredible pinpoint accuracy, that the day was coming when you, Bishop Boomer, all dressed up in your fancy muumuu and your new robes, would come prancing out into the sanctuary, the bulldozed sanctuary of the Catholic Church, as the abomination of desolation in the holy place, and claim that your new religion had no room whatsoever for the old religion, because that's what you've done.
And a little bit later, Matt says this.
I mean, they've been trying to do this for a long time, trying to burn the Catholic city down from within her own walls. They rolled that Trojan horse in a long time ago, that modernist Trojan horse, and out they came to destroy the Catholic Church from within. And Bishop Boomer here is simply confirming, he's simply making it obvious that that's exactly what he's literally saying. There's no room in this new church for 2,000 years of Catholic liturgical patrimony.
So there we have it. You just witnessed Michael Matt candidly admitting that it's a new church with a new religion and the abomination of desolation. Precisely the kind of thing Bishop Martin, understandably, from his perspective, doesn't want the trads in his diocese to be exposed to, right, or to hold. And that's what he's severely curtailing the traditional Latin Mass over, forcing his trads to either fish or cut bait. Either they believe the Vatican II religion is not Catholicism and then they have no place in his diocese, or they believe it's just a matter of preference, and then they can simply put their personal wishes aside in favor of following the will of their bishop instead. Say what you will about it, it makes sense. But back to Michael Matt. After slamming the new church with its new religion, what does he do? He laments that there's no room for Catholics in it. No room for the old religion. No room for the old Mass. Now, why a Catholic would want to have his own little traditional side altar in a parish of an apostate new church where he gets permission from the apostates to be Catholic while they practice a different religion is anyone's guess. Michael Matt thinks he's defending traditional Catholicism. He's not. He's defending a strange new doctrine with a lot of Latin, lace, and incense. Kind of like Leo XIV. TRADCAST Express is a production of Novus Ordo Watch. Check us out at tradcast.org, and if you like what we're doing, please consider making a tax-deductible contribution at novusordowatch.org/donate.